Agnes felt, rather than heard, the presence behind her. "You can leave them on the table," she said without turning round, "and I'll get to them in a minute." There was no answer. She finished washing the crockery, aware that whoever had come in had not left. She tried not to be annoyed. She had enough to do without having to endure more expressions of condolence from her neighbours. They were well meant, but every kind of word tested her resolve, and she had promised herself that she would keep her tears only for herself. A cold draught chilled her. "And shut the door," she snapped. "You're letting the winter in." Still no answer. She dried her hands on the apron and turned around, ready to give whoever was letting all the heat out a piece of her mind. "Oh," she said, it's you." Agnes should have been afraid, she realised in the back of her mind. But she wasn't. A kind of calmness had settled over her, like a soft woolen shawl. "I'm sorry," said John. He stood halfway between the kitchen table and the closed door. The cold draught was coming from him, not the winter's night. He seemed solid enough, but there was no way he could still be alive. His pale skin was broken and bruised by the rocks that killed him. One of his arms was mangled into a ribbon of meat and bone, and he was missing an eye. He still had his lantern in his remaining hand, and as she looked at him, it flickered fitfully with a blue-green flame. "Well, if it isn't bloody jaw of gold," she said bitterly. Her voice was hoarse, tears prickled in her eyes. It was too soon. Her grief was too raw. "I'm sorry," he said again. He didn't move towards her. There was something fundamentally forlorn about him, and she didn't know what to say. "I promised I'd never leave you," he said, looking up at last. His one remaining eye was just as she remembered it. In her memory, John's green eyes were always sparkling with mirth and the imp of mischief. These eyes were sad, so sad it cracked her heart all over again. "Oh, love," she said, her voice broken. She took a step towards him, but he shook his head slowly. "I can't stay. I just want you to know I didn't mean to go. I didn't mean to leave. I'm so sorry." "I know you didn't, you daft goose." She was crying now, and she didn't care. There was only her and John here to see it. "Nobody meant for it to happen. It just happened. Accidents just happen." "There's more," he said. "Some of the others, they're still alive. I promised I'd look after them, and they're afraid in the dark." This cut through her. Everyone in the village understood the terror of being lost in the dark under the hills, not killed quickly in the collapse, but facing a slow death of hunger and thirst. "We looked," she said, "but there were no signs. Not even any bodies, just rocks." "They looked in the wrong place," he said. His voice seemed more distant. There was something increasingly unreal about him. "We were in the spur, off the second gallery. They're still there, some of them." He paused. "I'm still there," he said at last. "I'll tell them," Agnes said. "I'll tell them, and they'll go up there myself, and—" She took another step towards him. He didn't seem any nearer, although he hadn't moved. "I have to go," John said. "I just wanted you to know I was sorry about the others, and—" "I love you," she said desperately. "Please don't leave me again." "I love you," he answered, and for a moment that spark flashed again. "But I can't stay." And then he was gone. Agnes felt another wrecking wave of grief, and for a moment she buried her head in her hands. Then she pulled herself together, splashed some cold water on her face, and ran to find Foreman Mary. As the winter sun rose over the black hills, the first stretchers were brought out from Everflow Mine. The woman on it, near death, but miraculously still alive. Another followed, and then another. They brought the first body out, and Agnes fancied she felt a gentle kiss on her cheek, and an invisible hand stroking her hair. But she was far too busy with physicking work to worry about anything else for a while. Overview. Tens of thousands of humans and orcs died in the battles to reclaim Mornwood, especially during awful battles of Spring 381. The worst of the fighting took place around Orchard's Watch on the Greenwood, and the shed blood sank into the earth and left an area haunted by remarkable numbers of unquieted spirits. Imperial Ghost and Jotun Ghost alike tended to be angry, confused, full of hate and despair and fury, lashing out on the living when they intruded upon their haunted places, endlessly refighting their final battles on moonless nights. The Friars of Honour's Rest did their best to lay as many of the ghosts to rest as possible. Then in the summer of 382, the Marcher Assembly sent Albert Fungalstone Copperhill to gather as many priests as possible to end the worst of the hauntings. Whenever possible, they tried to communicate with the ghosts, helping them pass on from the mortal world, relying on the ceremony of exorcism, only if all other efforts failed. The highest concentration of ghosts and the most dangerous hauntings were dealt with by the priests. Those spirits that remained were much less of a threat to the returning marchers and could be avoided. Friars and monks continued to try and help the phantoms that were still active to find some measure of peace. In time, the region settled down. It still has a haunted reputation, but as long as people were sensible and left the dead to their sorrow, the Greensward was safe as any other region of the marshes. Settlers built new homes on the Greenwoods, avoiding those haunted ruins that still remained. All this happened a few years ago, and now things have changed. Ghost stories. The Morn has been under an enchantment that brings ghosts and mortals closer together. During the autumn equinox, the Sacred Coven of Highgard wove a subtle winter enchantment over the entire Mornwood that brings the lingering spirits of the dead closer to the living. Under a thin silver of an orange autumn moon, a sorrowful wind swept through the Morn. When it passes, it stirs up a restless spirit that lie beneath the fields and the hills. Rather than anger them, however, the enchantment encouraged them to communicate with the living. At the same time, subtle magic makes it easier for the living to see and communicate with the remnants of the past. Wild stories spread across Mornwood as the ghosts rise from their forgotten graves. In most cases, encounters with the phantoms of the Morn are tinged with sorrow rather than fear. Ghosts linger for many reasons, and some just seek justice or recognition or a proper burial. Stories of remarkable encounters spread quickly. A murdered Freemore is exposed by the weeping spirit of her dead lover, thanks to the bravery of a governess. A company of soldiers killed in some long-ago battle in Greenmarch paraded through the streets of a little market town every night until the folks there conquered their fears to come out and thank them for their sacrifice. An Avar phantom leads a lonely friar into the shallow grave beneath a twisted yew tree. The skeletal remains within it are on their way north to find a resting place in the glades of Mirian. Not every story is so wholesome. There are angry spirits in the Morn, as well as those who simply seek justice, forgiveness, or recognition. For example, the guests and staff of Hillbridge Inn on Chalkdowns are driven from their beds in the middle of the night, when the loathsome spectre is a former owner comes roaring up from the cellar, bloated with hate and gluttony. The ghost instills ravenous hunger with his touch, and soul-crushing fear with glowing green eyes. In the end, it takes the abbot and all the monks of the nearby Fordwater Monastery to destroy the spirit and reclaim the inn. The magic is fading now, but it leaves behind an echo of understanding on those phantoms who have not been laid to rest. It also leaves an opportunity. The morning also. A memorial orchard would replace the haunted quilt of Greenswood with a memorial quality. The orchard would require 20 wains of weirwood, 10 wains of white granite, and 60 crowns. It would take 3 months to complete. Friar John of the Marshes and current Friar of House Rest was apparently forewarned of the Saker plan. They asked the General Assembly for aid in laying to rest the remaining ghosts around the ruins in Overton. The statement of principle did not achieve a greater majority, but at least a few priests from other parts of the Empire made their way to Overton to help with the ghosts there. In line with the earlier mandate of the Marcher Assembly, the intent to help lay the ghosts to rest rather than simply exorcise them. They also received a little advice from the Mornwold Thrales. While they are not Jotun themselves, they understand some of their beliefs, and they support helps when approaching the dead orc warriors. Made calmer by the enchantment, some can be laid to rest by fulfilling the unfinished business that keeps them in the world. A message delivered to a parent, an apology accepted on behalf of another, the singing of a final battle song, and learning the name that was feared forgotten. Most of the remaining phantoms of Greenswood resist such easy solutions, yet the point of the ritual enhancement is it creates an understanding between living and dead. It helps provide the wisdom which is a resonance of winter. What the majority of earthbound spirits, human and orc alike, seem to want is to be remembered, to have their sacrifice marked out, to be reassured that their deaths were not meaningless, that they died for something. The Jotun fear the oblivion of the howling abyss. If they let go of their grasp on the mortal world, they want to be honoured. Their imperial counterparts seem to be afraid of a howling eternity in the labyrinth. If they are forgotten, they want to be remembered. The ghosts won't move on, but they might be persuaded to rest, to retreat to their graves and sleep. The best solution the priests come up with is an orchard. This is the Marchers after all. Fruit trees planted around ruins of Orchard's Watch and across the barrow mounds the Jotun raised. The Friar of Honour's Watch would tend the orchard, ensuring that none of the trees ever cut down, ensuring nobody forgets the price paid by the warriors. The ruins of Overton and Orchard Watch would be left untouched, a place for the living to come and remember the terrible battles that raged here. The Orchard of the Watch is a folly which will require 20 wains of weirwood, 10 wains of white granite, and 60 crowns to establish. It will take 3 months to complete. Once it is established, it will replace the haunted quality of Greenswood with the memorial quality. As long as all the trees stand, an angry ghost still left on the Greenswood will not be troubled by the living. If the memorial were ever destroyed, however, not only would the ghosts rise from their graves once again, there is even a chance they would be absolutely furious. Their wrath would likely fall on whoever destroyed the orchard, and there is no easy way to predict what form that would take. There is no time limit on this opportunity. As long as nothing significant changes about the ghosts of Greenwood, it remains available. Participation. Anyone who spent time in Wormwood this season may have encountered a ghost. Anyone who has spent time in Wormwood this season is free to roleplay an encounter with a ghost. The enchantment of the Saker doesn't conjure ghosts in the manner of Whispers Through the Black Gate, however. Rather, it rouses ghosts, phantoms, and spectres already in existence and encourages them to communicate with the living. Likewise, the living gains subtle insight into how to communicate with ghosts and the ability to detect them more easily. Most of these encounters are likely to take forms familiar from traditional ghost stories, especially those involving unfinished business. Someone wronged in life cannot rest until they receive literal or symbolic justice. For example, a ghost might want a final message delivered or reassurance of some kind. There are a handful of more violent ghosts in Wormwood, but they are much rarer. It's fine to make up a story about an encounter with this kind of creature, but they are more likely to have needed exorcism than resolution to finish their business. If you're a priest with the exorcism skill, then it's fine to roleplay you spent time in Wormwood this season helping to lay spirits to rest. You might also have been involved in an attempt to deal with the ghosts of Greenwood alongside the Marcher Friars.